So hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's my pleasure and I'm very honored, honestly, as a chair of the CRE European chapter, to welcome you on this unique roundtable, which is a product of many of us as we were thinking what to do in the different way and how not to stuck in our minds and in our, let's say, knowledge islands. As you probably know, Councils of Real Estate is an organization comprised of seasoned professionals, but we really don't solely pass on the experience. That's why we have established this roundtable, where we want to speak old and young sharks. That's the rule for that is all sharks are from the CRE membership, those who are members of the CRE European chapter. And we have a young sharks, and I would like to welcome them that they are brave enough. Those are the people we found around us who have at least 5-year experience in the field. And we want to discuss the terms which are, for today, it is affordable living and housing. And we would like to discuss it in a way if we see the reality still in the same way as the next generation do. And me talking about the next generation of the professionals. So then it's really my pleasure and honor to open this first roundtable. I ask my friend and colleague in CRE, Jana Seckarova from Natland, will be bravely moderating today's event, and I wish you, Jana, all the best. You have opened the question and answers. If you have any question, please send it to us, and we will raise that up after the presentation. And Jana will pass you through the content, and believe that it will be juicy for you. So on behalf of the CRE organization, it's my pleasure to have you in, and we believe that we will meet in the other roundtables, as they will be for the offices and industrial, etc. So Jana, what is yours?
Thank you, Eddie. So welcome everyone. As Eddie mentioned, we are, starting this as one of the, roundtables on behalf of European chapter. We set up several specialty groups. One of the specialty groups, and their members, which are mostly present today. Some of them are present today, some of them will be present at the next roundtable. Today's topic is affordable housing, viewed by the professionals represented by some of the CI members, and also by our younger colleagues that's been in the market and perceived the situation in their perspective. So we will share several presentations today on the different countries, how the affordable housing is approached, and what policies or to what extent the state can play important role in this. And also we will look at it from the perspective of what can be done or changed on the level of the product and of the housing itself. Also the process of approval has been quite significant point in different countries. I come from Czech Republic, and that's quite critical situation here with all these permissions going or permitting process being very complicated and very long term. So we would like to start with Czech presentation that might give you some overview over the European markets. Our presentation will be presented by Jiri. Actually, and one more important thing, I will present all the speakers one by one, so you know the names of what country they're coming from. Jiri is my Czech, let's say, cooperative or colleague. He's coming from BTR agency company that is specialized in rental housing in Czech Republic. And he prepared, we put together a presentation that will give you some overview about where the Europe stands and where the Czech Republic stands. So let me just give a word to Jiri that will get you through the main points. And then we have also our colleagues from Austria, Spain, and Slovenia, and Serbia will be covered as well. So through all these presentations, you will see different approaches from different countries, or we will try to cover some approaches at different countries. And after that, we will be discussing in the open discussion several, things regarding the affordable housing and our point of views as we are. So let me give word to Jiri, and then we go back to the next one.
Thank you very much, Jana, for giving me the floor. Thank you for introduction. Housing affordability in Czechia worsened by 21% since 2015. This is the fifth highest increase in the EU. Well, that is the change, but what about the current situation? Next slide, please. Well, our capital, Prague, is the most unaffordable capital in the European Union. Why is that, right? What happened? Why is housing in Prague so unaffordable? Next slide, please. Here's a graph showing the share of net income spent on rent in dark blue and mortgage payments, light blue. Since 2018, mortgage payments have exceeded rents, but real change occurred in 2021 and 2022. Two things happened. People saw housing as protection against inflation, so demand drove prices up, and the Czech National Bank raised interest rates to 7%, making ownership much less affordable. But notice one more thing on the graph. Rental affordability stayed almost constant over 10 years, so didn't change very much over the decade. That's why I personally believe that rental housing is a form of affordable housing, or yeah, at least for some groups of people. Next slide, please. So who lives in rental housing? Half of adult tenants in Czechia are young people, age 20 to 40. That's a lot, in my opinion. In Prague, it's 56%. But why? Many people say young people choose renting over owning because they want to stay flexible. That it is kind of choice, like how to say it correctly, like it's a trend, but personally I don't agree. Next slide, please. So this graph from Czech Academy of Sciences shows that 40% of young people rent, but what they plan after considering their financial situation, majority of current young tenants plan to buy their own home. But if they don't consider their financial limits, 97% of young people would prefer to own rather than rent. This shows renting isn't a lifestyle trend. It's all about affordability. However, there is a trend among young people that I would like to tell or talk on the next slide. Young people are leaving their parents' homes earlier, but having children later. The graphs show they now spend more time living independently before starting families. So people change. And what about apartments? Well, apartment sizes remain constant. Half of Prague units are occupied by one person, which average size of these apartments about 55 square meters. I believe these apartments are historically and unnecessarily large and therefore expensive. I mean, obviously only for single people or childless couples. I believe the market lacks small and affordable apartments. Next slide, please. So how can we address unaffordable housing? In my opinion, there are three possible solutions. Next slide, please. The first solution is market-based, smaller rental apartments for young people. On the left, you see standard apartment sizes and rents. On the right, small apartments with lower total rents. Bright green highlights show benefit for both tenants and investors. Tenants save hundreds of euros monthly. Meanwhile, investors achieve higher returns per square meter. Next slide, please. The second solution is government intervention. I believe that Jana or Eduard, sitting here next to me, could both name several actions our government could take to improve housing affordability. The first would be probably simplifying or speeding up building permit processes or deregulating construction standards. Unfortunately, these remain just wishes. One concrete step forward solution, however, is the affordable housing program introduced this year. It offers subsidies for the purchase, construction, or renovation of rental housing for specific professions like teachers or doctors, and young people, and for people within income limits. The maximum subsidy is 25% of 10 million euros, which is not much, but I believe better than nothing. Next slide, please. So my last slide and the third solution is corporate social responsibility. The good example, I believe, is Erste Group, which is building in Prague affordable rental housing with rents 20% below market levels. They are currently constructing over 600 apartments in Prague. So that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jiri. So as you've seen right now, the numbers are actually quite significant. And we've seen several possible solutions that's been in play at the moment. We'll see where it goes to. And in a later discussion, I'd like to address it a little bit more. For now, we have Christoph Nemetschke here present with us as a representative of Young Sharks from Austria. And he prepared a presentation about Austria for us, also about some insight from the market. And unfortunately, his seasoned colleague, our CI member Anton, is in hospital today. We wish him all the best. He couldn't be with us today, but I'm pretty sure that Christoph is more than well equipped to go through the presentation. So Christoph is on you, and thank you for your insight.
Thank you for the warm introduction. I'm pleased to wish you all greetings from Anton. He wished he could be here, but I'll do my best to cover for him. We tried to give you an outlook throughout our presentation over the market in Austria, which has to be looked on from kind of a different angle, because we have Vienna as a best practice example, if you want, for social housing in general. But there are some significant changes at the moment, which make it, which show that there's a need for an intervention and for a political discussion on the topic of social housing. On the next slide, we try to outline you the current status and problems we face in Austria. Generally speaking, we have 9 different building codes within one Republic of Austria, which is due to 9 different federal states, which leads to a very high level of bureaucracy and therefore very long approval processes by the authorities. For example, if you want to obtain your building permit, it takes up to several years. There is a very complex and kind of outdated rent law in general, which needs to be revised. A revision is long overdue, but as we experience it at the moment, no government is willing to start the process because it's quite political. Furthermore, we experience a decline of completions of around 25% or even more. In the same time, we have high demands and high standards concerning sustainability issues, such as ESG, which also drive up the costs, which make it far more difficult for developers to get hold of the cost topic. On the other hand, we have experienced increasing land prices and property prices throughout the last years. Ownership in general becomes more and more unrealistic and much more difficult to obtain for younger generation, especially. In the same discussion, we have to mention that we have some very strict, at the moment, I have to say, we have some very strict financing restrictions, which make it almost impossible for younger generation or even a situated household with two incomes to obtain properties or apartments because they're so strict. But there is already some movement, which I will get on later too. At the same time, we experience rising rent prices. This is due to several factors, which also for the people who can't obtain property and acquire property, make it much more difficult because they are drafted and go into renting, where we also experience a rise of the prices. If you'd be too kind to go to the next slide, I want to give you an overview of the, sorry, you jumped one too far, the Vienna situation, yeah. The status in Vienna. In Vienna, we have approximately 2 million inhabitants. There is a forecast that it will rise up to 15% up until the year of 2050, which is a problem because there is a decrease in development of apartments. There are approximately 950,000 apartments in Vienna at the moment, 50% of which are single households. 72% of these apartments are subsidized, and Vienna, and that's why I said it's a best practice example, is one of the largest, if not the largest, private owner of apartments in Austria, but also as a municipality in general. Only 28% of the flats in Vienna are privately owned and therefore are no subject to rent restrictions. There is the famous Viennese municipal housing called in German Gemeindebau, which is, like I said, a subsidized form of living. It is there we have fixed rent prices, but on the other hand, the application process to be considered for such an apartment are very complex and difficult, and you need to have a lot of time because there is no general rule how long there's a maximum for the application. There are said to be 22,000 new apartments built within the next years, which is to be seen skeptical, but within the last 2 years, there were 73% of the new apartments developed by commercial developers. Only 27% of those were classified as social housing. In the meantime, the rent prices rose by 80% since 2010. So what are our approaches? On the next page, please. On the next slide, please. Our approaches, or the approaches we see already happening in Vienna and Austria in general, is that there's a formation of new innovative living concepts, such as mixed housing. People are looking into apartments which are much smaller, which are shared very often. There are some concepts like young professionals sharing with senior residences in order to get hold of the costs and be able to afford an apartment. From our point of view, there has to be a revision or a think process how to lower the regulation and acquire more personal responsibility and include all the stakeholders into the discussion. There needs to be a reduction of the bureaucracy, and therefore we hope that we would get faster approval processes so that we can have even more developments of apartments within the near future. As I said, our rent law is quite complex and really needs some sort of revision. We are hoping that there is some movement within the next governmental period, which should start by beginning of next year. And we need the called loosening of the financial conditions. As I said, there are already some talks happening. As of yesterday, there were news that the regulations should be loosened by June of next year. So we are looking forward that there is already something happening. Another approach from our side would be government to intervene in order to secure affordable properties. For example, one case study which works quite well in Vienna is via leasehold, so that there are ways that government intervenes and tries to control the prices of properties on the market. This would be the quick summary of the approaches we have here in Austria. Thank you very much.
No, you are muted.
Am I? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sorry for that. A little technical issues. Thank you, Christoph. Just one remark. The reason, we put together Austrian, Spanish, Slovenian, Serbian, and Czech kind of overview about what is the situation with the housing in general and how, what is the affordability. But very interesting insight for us, like Czechs compared to Austrians, is that Austria has been, didn't really have that period of 40 years of communism as we had. And they are facing, actually at the moment, we are facing similar situation. And also Austria has been, there's a big proportion of state-owned apartments that's been, regulated for years. And still we are talking very similar problems here. So this is just one remark about that. And I'd like to welcome Fernando Rodriguez-Lluesma. I hope I said it in the right way, your name.
Perfect.
It's our colleague from Madrid, and he'll go quickly through his presentation about Spanish situation for us. And sorry, I need to introduce Javier as well. Sorry, I'm very bad at this. And Javier is his younger colleague, right? And he will be with us today in the discussion or presentation. I don't know how we're going to do that.
So first of all, I would like to send a warm greeting to all CRI members and guests who have joined us today in this webinar. So as we have seen in the cases of Czech Republic and Austria, in the big cities of Europe, we have the challenge of generating a large volume of affordable housing to meet a demand that is growing much faster than the supply that the developers can bring to the market. If you go to the first slide, please. The second one. Okay, in Spain, as in the other countries, as we have already seen, we start from a very similar market situation, and where there are major challenges to prevent the placing on the market of a greater volume of units at affordable prices, such as you can see on the screen: shortage of land, lack of bank financing for the purchase of land, slow and complex bureaucratic processes. Okay, we can go on, but although the starting point is similar, I would like to present an initiative developed here in the community of Madrid that is providing to be successful in its ability to generate and put on the market a large number of affordable units through a successful formula that generates clear benefits for all parties involved, that is for public administration, private investors, and end users. Next slide, please. Let me start with giving you two figures that confirms that we are facing a successful story. In 3 years, more than 9,500 units under development, and a committed investment of more than $1.2 billion. The model I'm going to present to you is based basically in three pillars. The first one is the administration. Under a 75-year concession scheme, the administration puts its public land bank on the market with the following particularities: 0 annual fee, So for the developers, the cost of the land of this concession is zero, no cost at all. This land must be devoted to ready to build to rent units, and the maximum rents must be 40% lower than the market price. The second pillar is the private investor, that they assume the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the affordable rental housing during the entire period of the concession, obviously at no cost for the administration, with a 24 months commitment for the execution of the projects and the assumption of the maintenance cost of the common services, defined for each plot according to the building specification. And the third pillar is that at the end of the concession period, once the building has been refurbished, they return to the administration, which generate a stock of affordable housing for zero cost to the administration. So it's a system in which everyone wins, and you can see basically on the screen the requirements of the building. So you see that we are not talking about providing affordable housing to the public, but doing this in a way that all the stakeholders wins. The next slide, please. And finally, I would like to share the summary of the results obtained in these 4 years and after 3 tenders. I think that these data show that public-private collaboration can generate a large number of affordable housing units in a short period of time to meet the existing demand, and where all parties, as we already have said, win. The administration wins because it satisfies the emergency of new affordable housing without committing public investment, and after 75 years, generating a portfolio of public housing at zero cost. Private investor wins because they can enter to develop many units, because there is no payment for the use of the land, and they can exploit it for 75 years at a returns, a profitability around 5%. And finally, the demand also wins because they have access to a large number of housing units with a rental price well below the market. And for a failure, and they can go and they can reach these units in a really very short period of time that they came into the market. So this is a solution that we are trying here in Madrid. This solution, as you are right now seeing this model or this scheme of that is really related to a PPP project, right now is spreading all around Spain. And okay, I think that can be an example, obviously, with some adaptation to every other country and reality of the city to other places. Thank you for your attention. And I give the word to my colleague Javier to give his impressions and also reflections about this solution.
Hi. Well, from my perspective, okay, all this plan, to start with, was born because of an urban planning, let's call it a flaw, right? All this land, this public land, it came from the urban planning approved for lots that were meant to be, let's say, public facilities, right? So all this stock of land, it was supposed to be developed by today. The thing is, what we have found out, checking an inventory of empty public land, it was that the town halls have not the financial muscle to develop them. So after checking that and finding all this struggle to produce all this affordable housing, this was a solution born from a flaw. What I want to say is that, okay, that means that the urban planning was not properly done, because it was not meeting the expectations or whatever the economics that the town halls were supposed to be. So if this is very successful, that means that in the future, one thing, this has to be properly regulated because it works, or the urban planning have to take into account that town halls cannot develop. The land is meant to be for them, so it has to be less or something like that. So that was my first impression. And then, okay, first of all, I think the plan is a great success in terms of providing affordable units, right? They are meant for renting. Spain is not a country for renting based, but for big cities, definitely is an improvement, a huge one. And well, the next steps can go this way. But what we don't know is once you intervene in such a way that you can put, let's say in 4 years, it's almost 10,000 units. We don't know how far we can go because until now, Fernando, correct me if I'm wrong, this has been developed only in Madrid region, right? And it's been exported to different ones. So what we don't know is how is this going to affect the rest of the market? Hopefully the prices may decrease, right? But that is something we cannot measure. What is going to be with all the private traditional investors? That is something we have to see. Right now we can still yet see the future, but I think it's good news. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with the urban planning, if there is changes around all of this proposal. And yeah, I mean, I find a bit of hope in here. So yeah, basically that's my impression. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Fernando. Yes, I hope this optimistic end will actually mean that, you know, there will be more cities like Madrid. And it's actually a very interesting example of, you know, how to work in the public sector with the private investors. This is something that we are still learning in Czech Republic, and we have really big difficulties to, you know, to find the right setup. So very interesting for us to hear that. And we also have Vlad here, Vlad Ilić and Milica Vučković. I hope I said it right. As a young professional with Vlad, who is a very valued CRE member, also lead of one of the specialty groups, I think, right? And so guys, it's on you. And they prepare a presentation of former Yugoslavian countries and or two of former Yugoslavian countries, if I'm correct, right? It's Serbia and Slovenia, just short overview. Thank you.
Well, it looks like that you are muted.
Maybe to say that for Serbia and Slovenia, it's actually similar to what we've been through in Czech Republic and former Eastern European countries, but still it's different. So it's been quite interesting for us to see this, and I'm not sure what's wrong with they are muted probably, or they don't know.
I see the Vlad is trying that.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're unmuted.
But anyhow, it seems to be a political issue everywhere. Yeah. Doesn't matter whether it's former Yugoslavian countries that were not under communist regime or whether it's Czech Republic. It's one thing that is similar to all the countries, and that means it's a hot political topic. Mm-hmm.
But we do not hear you actually.
Okay.
So it looks like technical issue. No.
Yes, I hope I'm online right now.
Now you are on. Now you are on.
Okay, so sounds right with the connection. I was offline for a few seconds there. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay. I guess I missed a few things here. First, let me say good evening to everybody listening, and we're glad to have people here. And I hope the discussion has been interesting so far. And now we'd like to discuss a little bit about Serbia and Slovenia. And the reason why we chose to talk about Serbia and Slovenia is because when we look at what was former Yugoslavia after the split up, the breakup of Yugoslavia, we have two republics that are members of the European Union, while the rest of the countries today are in line for membership, but still outside of the European Union. And we're just going to try to briefly explain the differences, how social housing is handled within the EU and what's happening outside of the EU. So we're going to really begin right away with Serbia and just briefly go over what's happening in Serbia. Unfortunately, the issue more in Serbia is more a political issue than anything else, and where the government for each election cycle will try to build or finance certain projects, small scale projects. And what they usually do is they'll take a certain profession. It's usually the police, military, or academia, and they will build low cost housing for those professions. And this is done for each election cycle. And once the election cycle is over, nobody really talks about it until the next elections that are usually in about 3 years. So unfortunately, that is the situation in Serbia. As far as land is concerned, there is no lack of land because Belgrade and every major city in Serbia has land that is allocated for social building. But the problem is that with that, we really don't have a strong private public initiative here in Serbia. It hasn't been developed, and only a few projects have been done in that way. So as far as social housing is concerned, very little has been done here in Serbia, and I think more or less that applies to all countries outside of the EU. Now, when we go into Slovenia, next slide, please. And when we go into Slovenia, the situation is a little bit different. First, I just want to mention here that basically this is a part of every constitution in Europe. Every country has certain laws regarding social housing, regarding the need for the government to be involved in this problem. I just found it interesting that it's not something that we just talk about, but it's something that the state has to be involved in, and there really is no solution without the state involvement in this problem. Next slide, please. As far as Slovenia is concerned, and this is very typical for all former communist countries, with the fall of Berlin Wall and in Serbia with the breakup of Yugoslavia, what happened was there was a large stock of housing, and all of that was privatized. It was privatized for a very small amount of money. So about over 70% of the housing stock in Slovenia is privately owned. Something that's totally different than what we have in Austria that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. So over 70, almost 80% of all houses are privately owned in Slovenia as a result of the privatization of the housing fund after the breakup of Yugoslavia. This may seem, I think, a good solution, and we probably won't think about it as a problem, but it really did cause a few problems down the road, because with all the housing fund that was bought, the younger people were more or less squeezed out of the market, because who was able to afford the properties then? It was usually the older generation who was able to buy the properties, while the younger people who just began working, they didn't have the funds, and they weren't able to buy the properties. And in the early stages, the Slovenian government wasn't even thinking about affordable housing. So what happened was that the older generations were the ones that bought the housing stock, while the younger generations were squeezed out. And so we had a very restricted housing supply, and the mobility was extremely low. And also what happened was that the housing, the stock that was inherited was a former communist, what we call socialism, which is old apartments that are refurbished, and they make up a majority of the housing stock that we have on the market. Next slide. So with just a few numbers, we want to look here at Slovenia. Slovenia right now, they need about 50,000 rental units, and the gap would be about 4.7 billion that is needed to build those rental units. And also a major problem in Slovenia is student housing, because Slovenia is a university center that draws students not only from Slovenia but also from the ex-Yugoslavia. You have many students coming into Slovenia. So the student housing market is also a problem. Approximately around 3,200 units are needed. Next slide. And also now, the Slovenian market is very dependent on migrant workers from all ex-republics of Yugoslavia, and you have a large influx of people moving into Slovenia either on a permanent basis as immigrants or working as seasonal workers. And once they move into Slovenia, the problem is there is a total lack of affordable housing, and often we have overcrowding in these apartments where about 40% of the people that are immigrating into Slovenia are living into overcrowded accommodations. While when we look at the total amount of people living in Slovenia, that number drops to 11.5%. So right now, I think Slovenia is in need of building more apartments, especially for the migrant workers, because again, those are migrant workers that are coming in looking for a better opportunity to be able to work within the European Union, but they are very extremely limited, especially as soon as they come into Slovenia and start working. So they're very limited as far as the funds that they have is concerned. Okay, next slide. In Slovenia, the only government agency that is solving this problem is the Housing Fund of Slovenia, and they are funding various projects, units that they own, that they will rent for either non-profit or low profit, and also they have favorable loans, and they work very closely with the rest of the municipalities in Slovenia and trying to help younger people buy properties. Next slide. And what Slovenia did was a very interesting project because, as I mentioned before, about 70% of houses are privately owned. Majority of those houses that are owned or properties that are owned by the older generation of people there. So the problem is with helping the younger generations, the young professionals, be able to afford apartments. So what Slovenia did was it was an innovative solution where they built the GmbH youth community building. It's in a building that is rented only to young people from the age of 18 to 29. Those are young professionals, college students, and they're rented for zero profit. And the vacancy is 0% right now, and it's been in use for several years now, and the vacancy is always 0%. And after 29 years old, the younger people will either buy an apartment or be able to afford renting an apartment. So it's an interesting solution that they've done in Slovenia, and it's turned out to be a pretty good idea. Again, these are small apartments with certain community centers involved, and it's I think one of the better ideas that they have, and maybe they're not solving the problem of being able to buy apartments, but at least they're helping the younger people to afford something that is sustainable, that is a higher quality of property that they will be able to rent. So this has been in use for several years, and it's been financed with the Central European Bank. It was, I think, 50 million in 2018 and 70 million in 2021. And with that, I'd just like to finish up with Slovenia. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Vlad. Milica is with you, I guess, right?
Yeah, yes.
Does Milica want to comment on any of this?
Sure.
Just to give her.
Okay.
Can you hear me all?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Vlad has actually covered most of the things we talked about. And yes, that would be my conclusion as well, that the situation in Serbia is at the moment without solution. In Slovenia is a bit different because the governmental situation in Slovenia is different, but the base is the same, that all owners, all apartments are pretty much going to sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you are okay.
Yeah, good.
Sorry. So I will go back to the situation in Serbia. I think the biggest problem is that we have no backup from from the state. And the situation with rents and credit option and prices for buying the apartments have changed, like increased twice or in the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years. So basically, if we exclude the situation, the thing with the Ministry of Defense, where they provide the land for the apartments to be built for their employees, we have no projects and no options in case something changes in the state of Serbia. As for Slovenia, I think Vlad covered everything we found.
Yeah,
so
well,
far.
Slovenia seems to be on the right track. Let me just open the discussion about, we've heard many interesting examples. Every country is approaching differently, and from different actually foundations. We have today Peter Barton here, who is our chief economist on behalf of Natland Group. And I would like to maybe ask him, because he heard all these presentations for the first time today, and whether we see any possible scenario which would work in the longer run for achieving some better affordability on the market. So Peter, if you can maybe give us some hints, what are you thinking?
Right. Thanks very much. It's been a fascinating discussion and an excellent choice of countries, because we have among the represented countries pretty much a good mix of all examples of issues that affect the question of affordability of housing, but from different backgrounds. And it's interesting that to an economist's mind, they all come ultimately to one single issue, which is going to be useful, hopefully, for our discussion. But if I can just review the choice of countries, the issue in the Czech Republic, that's let's say a standard transition country, which has struggled mostly from the fact that people were used under communism to paying relatively little for their housing, and for various political reasons, there has been a struggle to enable more housing to be built, and therefore the affordability is felt especially strongly, as we've seen in the data, at least in the capital, the problem seems to be the worst of all the countries. Now, then we had Austria with the example of Vienna, which is, let's say, a traditional example of the Western-style social democratic approach to public policy, which says, yes, markets are good, but we need to regulate them and subsidize them in the especially sensitive areas like housing, right? Then we had Spain with, let's say, a traditional example of a Western capitalist country with certain issues due to migration, and also the fact that it's the most southern country also is going to play some role. And ultimately, Serbia, also a transition country, but with, and Slovenia, also a transition countries, but again, a mixture of the transition issues from communism, as well as much larger mobility issues and migration issues than the Czech Republic. So to me, it's a perfect example, the sample of countries that we've discussed, of really various problems that they are facing. There isn't a single thing which seems to be the primary issue of concern throughout the presentations. They all, at face value, seem to be addressing different problems, which is to be expected given the variety of countries. And yet, to an economist, I'd like to suggest that there is a common thread among them. In most of the presentations, we've heard, okay, what can the state do? Okay, it can subsidize in one way or another. There are various funds which would be available, let's say, especially for the young or for the necessary occupations which are needed, like nurses, people in hospitals. That's usually the traditional target of some sort of subsidized housing, because especially in large cities. There are lots of hospitals. They don't pay nurses that much. Oh, let's subsidize their housing to make nurses want to move to the city and provide their nurse services to the city hospitals. And there is a variety of issues like that. Of course, to an economist, that may be a solution, that may be a way forward, but it seems like it's only sticking a plaster on an open wound, which is gushing forth through a exposed fracture. There is like hemorrhaging of blood, and yet all we're doing through these subsidies is just to stick a plaster on it and hope that the plaster is going to contain the pressure of blood gushing out of the body. Surely we have to address the ultimate issue. Why is there the worsening of the situation? And that's the common thread. The state sitting on the source, the only source how we can make housing cheaper, and unless we want to rely that the population is going to reduce, which is very, very bad policy, no politician and nobody should think about solving anything by reducing the population. Therefore, demand is not going to go down. And to an economist, the world is very simple. The economist only has two hands. One is called supply and the other one is called demand. So if we don't want to reduce demand, which we don't, we need to increase supply. Unless we increase supply, housing will never be affordable, and all government policies will only be a temporary plaster on a arterial wound, which is hemorrhaging blood and eventually is going to render the patient lifeless. So why is there a constraint on the supply? Yes, there is a problem with interest rates. In some states, the state can do something about them. Not all central banks are independent of the state. And of course, if you live in a country where the central bank, which ultimately helps to dictate the interest rates, there could be some sort of room to alleviate the high interest rates to make building cheaper. You can open up, the other thing that the state can do is to open up trade to be able to import cheaper bricks, cheaper building materials, if there is a constraint from places which can produce building materials cheaper. That way building will be cheaper and housing will become affordable. But those are very, very minor issues. The ultimate way in which the state constrains and prevents an increase from supply is through the regulations. Now, it doesn't matter whether we call it municipal regulations or statewide regulations. Ultimately, the state can, through its ultimate authority, influence even the Viennese, for example, like city municipality regulations. Ultimately, Vienna is within the state, and the state laws, should they be passed or should they be changed, ultimately oversee the local municipal regulations. So to my mind, the only thing ultimately which the state can do to increase the affordability is to allow houses to be built. And that will reduce the cost of acquiring housing for owner-occupied housing. That will reduce also rents, because ultimately if there is more housing for rent, then rents will go down and will become more affordable. So that to me is the silver thread which can be applied to all of our countries and pretty much any country, at least in Europe, that I can think of, without which we will never achieve any affordability or increase in affordability. And to my mind, that should be the political focus of anybody in the construction industry. Don't go down the dead-end street of hoping for more subsidies, because if we lived 10, 20 years ago, there might be a chance that we would be able to see increased subsidies and they would be attainable. Unfortunately, we live now in 2024. Every of our countries is facing aging population. The demands on government budgets is about to skyrocket just to pay for pensions. And therefore, even if we manage to lobby for some sort of subsidy in order to make housing more affordable, it's going to be cancelled, it's going to be reduced drastically within a year or two, as ultimately pensioners demand more and more through the political process on the government budgets. Therefore, even if it was a temporary solution, which I don't think it is, then it's ultimately unsustainable. The only thing which can bring all of us to more affordable housing is to make states reduce the constraints on the ultimate solution to the problem, i.e. we need to build more. Not just anywhere, we need to build more there where people want to live. And that's my silver thread that links to all of us.
Thank you, Peter. It's almost like a closing statement. We want to open discussion with this. Like you all heard what Peter said. I just want to briefly go back to the topic. And the reason why we also invited our young professionals is that how do we actually define affordable today? Because we've heard in the presentation several times social housing topics being one thing, but what's affordable today? Because it seems to be that a much larger group of people has been concerned about their housing, and they cannot really afford the housing which they want. They cannot afford the rental levels they primarily can reach. What's actually affordable right now? I mean, on the level of the housing.
Jiri, what do you think?
It's a really hard question because there's no, we cannot put any cap on the rents. We cannot put any cap on the prices. That would be nonsense. So is it 40% like expense on housing, 40% of average wage? I don't know. I have no idea actually. I don't know how to, like, it's not something everybody deserve to have a luxury home. It's something everybody has to pay for it. So,
but there's interesting thing, like it's been in Vlad's presentation. It's a constitutional right in many countries to have, to get some, to reach to housing. So it is a much wider issue. It's been political issues across all the countries, even Austria, which is to my surprise. Then in Salzburg, I reckon that there was more than, we had it last year on the CRE conference, more than 10% Communist Party. The main topic has been we provide housing to all of you.
Yeah, the thing from my point of view, the thing is that many young people are kept from the possibility of even thinking about owning. So they're driven into renting. And the thing is, rent consists of the main rent and the operating costs. Within the last few years, with everything's going on geopolitically, the operating and running costs skyrocketed. So for many people, it was even difficult to obtain the standard of the apartments they already secured and where they already lived on a rent basis. So for many people, there isn't even a choice whether I want to own or whether I want to rent. And I think in the whole political discussion, there needs to be found a way that not only renting is an opportunity for younger people, but also owning. And the thing is, the more people need to rent, the higher the prices go in renting. So what I liked about the solution in Slovenia, for example, which is quite funny because Slovenia and Austria share a border and the perspectives and the solutions are totally contrary and totally different. So what I like is that there is a focus on the younger generation, even if it's not to the fullest extent, but there is a focus on the younger generation so that they have a chance to rent or to live or to go into housing, for example.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting for us to hear that as well, because we went through the process of deregulation. Most of the apartments been sold to the private owners after revolution, and then now we're facing the situation that people there is a big disproportion on the market because of that, and it's been sold for low prices. Nowadays, it's absolutely unreachable for them to buy anything. Let me just maybe turn, because we've heard from Peter that there's not much we can do.
Well, there is lots to do.
No, I mean, there's not much
There's lots to do. And if I can just add that, if the question is, what can the young do? Well, they can ultimately go to the politicians who ultimately have to change the laws, the regulations, and say, look, you want us to pay for the old generation because ultimately it's going to be out of our taxes that you're going to finance the old age pensions. How are we supposed to pay our taxes? How are you hoping for the young generation to pay for the pensions of the old if we have to spend so much money on housing? Therefore, if you want to sustain the old generation out of our taxes, by our, I mean, young generation's taxes, you have to do something about the housing. Okay, you want me to say something controversial? Here it goes. The more we help the young generation through various subsidies, the worse, not better, the situation becomes. Because then the young generation will feel, oh, finally the government has done something for us. It has helped our difficult housing situation, and therefore we don't have to worry about it. And therefore there is not going to be the pressure on the government to release its constraint on the building, and therefore ultimately it makes the situation worse, not better. So, okay, here is the ultimately controversial thing. Ban all subsidies for young people so that they rise up and realize how much of a difficult problem it is, because ultimately somebody has to change the politicians. And unless it becomes a really difficult social problem, which in some countries it already is, but clearly not enough, then nobody is going to listen among politicians, because they will always listen more to the old generation who is going to demand more and more pensions. Here is my controversial bit. Hopefully it will start some conversation.
Does anybody wants to say anything to this suggestion?
Jana, I want to go back to what Christopher said just a few minutes ago. What I'd like to ask all the young sharks here, how important is ownership versus rentals to you? And what do you think is going to happen in, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years? Will ownership be more important then, or will the younger generation today be more inclined to rent? Just want to see how you think about that.
Okay.
I'm asking all four of you.
So I can only answer for the Austrian perspective, but in Austria, it's kind of within our DNA that it's the securest form is owning. So it's always the goal to own. But the situation shifted. And like Peter said before, I also think that the only way out of this situation is if we build more. But at the moment, it's a very inhostile environment for developers to develop more, because on the one side, we have increasing prices. On the other side, we are limited on the rent that we can generate. There is a high level of bureaucracy, which leads to longer processes, which also cost money. And the thing is that at the moment, there is not even on the market side, from the buyer's perspective, anyone who can obtain to own, so who can afford to own, because there are financing regulations. So at the moment, we have skyrocketing prices. At the same time, there is a demand because the cities are growing, but the younger generation can't think about owning. So what I think would be a solution is like in the model Spain presented, is that the cities secure land for new constructions at reasonable, affordable prices. Then developments make more sense from a developer's point of view. And at the same time, we need to think about reducing the standards we have in apartments, because right as of now, we have a very high standard, even at sustainable, even at social housing, which criteria and standards we have to meet. And all these factors cost a lot of money, and we really have to start a discussion whether we should reduce the standards in order to keep hold of the cost.
Okay. Can I just, I guess we started talking. Now, coming from a former communist country where we had a low standard of living, what the result of that is today we have a huge stock of old buildings that are not sustainable. Gradually, they're privately owned today, but we're still not used to the idea that private citizens, we are the ones that are supposed to maintain the building. It's the thing that we've inherited from the communist system, is somebody else is supposed to do that instead of us. So I'm not really sure. I don't agree with lowering the standards of the building. I think that may cause problems in 10 to 20 years, because that's the same thing that happened in all communist countries. From the 50s on, where there was a huge need to build projects that were lower quality, and what you have today, the building stock in most of former communist countries are low quality, unsustainable buildings.
Well, Vlad, I have to agree with our Austrian colleagues, because regarding the standards nowadays we're meeting, it's like the minimum house you can build is not affordable anymore. It's the minimum. I'm not going over there. It's like social housing and private owned developed house nowadays. It's only the only thing changing is if the finish of the floor is marble or granite. About all the mechanics, electrics, and plumbing things, it's super high standards even for the minimum. And the thing is, I mean, no developer can jump into it. No, they don't want to develop it because they cannot sell under the price set by government. So I cannot see the light over there. Spain is basically like Austria in terms of culture, right? People here usually owns. I mean, people in their 60s, they were not renting at all. Nobody. Yeah. But nowadays, that is the only escape, right? The only way to put a roof on your head is to go renting. And the proposal Fernando presented, we'll see. But at least you can put in the market a huge amount of housing meeting the standards. And basically, because of its restrictions in terms of the time lapse, you have to explode the thing. It's also bringing industrialization into the market, which hopefully will bring down the price as well. But yeah, it means a change in culture, even in Spain, turning into renting instead of buying the houses.
Do you rent or do you buy? Do you rent your apartment? Do you rent where you live, or are you owner of it?
Me, I own it.
You own it.
Okay. After great effort, I have to say. But my city is a small one. I'm talking about 300,000 people living in here. But when I was living in Madrid, and I lived there for 7 years, I could even think about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me just what standards? It's a good question, because we as former Vlad and I, we will probably be on a common page or the same page. We've been through the period of time when we were building fast for larger proportion of population. Nobody knows what is the lifespan of those buildings. They are still standing. Some of the brave German people to tear them down and build new ones. We still have them here. The question is whether this kind of construction is actually possible these days. With the industrialization, as I heard from Javier, I've been just in Helsinki, they are actually practicing this in the largest extent. But are we ready as a society to build fast prefabricated houses, which we don't really know what is the lifespan of these buildings, just because the cost can be maintained lower? That's a big question. I don't really see this coming along with the European policy on sustainability and green, let's say, green housing in a longer run. So this goes against all the policies that are in play, and also there is a big demand for high certification of the buildings at the moment. So sustainability and all the issues come into play, and lowering the standard to prefabrication, for example, that might be the way to do this. But also, we all perceive this as a former communist countries, that the real estate is, holding the value or maintaining the value in the longer run. So there is one thing I actually personally see is that we perceive investment into real estate as a safe bet. And you know, will this be still the thing when we build faster, lower standardized, lower standard buildings just in order to accommodate a large amount of people? So that's like, you know, these are the issues that they might arise. And maybe I might actually ask if Milica wants to comment on this, because we didn't give her enough space for have her opinion on that, maybe. And I guess Milica she's an architect as well, right?
She's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I have some problem with the sound. So, well, I pretty much agree with all of you. If we're talking about prefabrications, I think, and that kind of solutions, I think that's very reasonable, but not something that we can apply in Serbia, for example, because all kind of projects that are that big scale are pretty much non-existing in last, let's say, 15 or 20 years. So in all the countries that you presented, maybe there are options where you can talk about projects where you can decrease the price with some, I don't know, reusable materials or prefabricated options. But here they're pretty much building with the lowest standard, as Vlad said, with the low standard options, and everything they build is made for just to keep the thing for let's say next 10 years. So in this country at the moment, I think without including the some kind of private-public how to say that, private-public completion, we cannot plan on these kind of projects where we can decrease the price with using some cheaper materials or something that is easier to build with, if that was your question. I'm not sure if I understood your...
No, you're right. It's just, you know.
And as just to add on Vlad's question about whether it's better to rent or own the apartment, for example. Also on the subject of Serbia, I don't think that renting is anything someone can plan on here, since, for example, rent price for the same apartment in Belgrade in the last 5 years has doubled, or in some options tripled. So it's very unstable. Yep. For example, like young people in the age of 30 to plan on and increase an income has not doubled and tripled as well. So yes, ownership is also tricky, and let's say the credits, the loan interests are changing as well, but it's still something that everybody hopes for. Nobody's thinking and planning on renting as a better option. We had a lot of, for example, Russians coming to Serbia as a
Lost.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now.
Now we can hear you.
I hear some strange sound. So so there is a war in Russia. So we have a lot of Russians coming here, and that changed the prices a lot in Belgrade, rental prices especially, but also ownership. I mean, the prices of the apartments, for example, for the same apartment that was 50 square meters in Belgrade, that was, let's say, 70,000 euros, like 7 years from now. Now you have to pay 200,000 euros for. And for people that remain with the same payments, it's really hard to keep on. So nobody.
So I guess for you, the question about affordability, well, you as a member of a younger generation, you perceive this as being a very critical topic in your country.
Exactly. So that's why I mean, I agree absolutely on all of these possible solutions that you gave, but I don't see the space for it in Serbia because political situation here is very unstable at the moment.
Mm. Okay, well, I'm afraid, well, unless anybody wants to add something more, maybe any of the CRE members wants to comment on this, we are actually at the end of the time today. And
So, Jana,
we have some Q&A questions.
We had one Q&A question, which was for the Czech Republic, who administrates the affordable program.
I think you want to say about something about it, but it's actually a state-run agency, correct? And which is very interesting. They are full of younger professionals from private sector. So it's been established just recently, and there are several agencies within the bigger towns and the cities. Well, we have only 2 cities in Czech Republic, I guess. So so it's been established, and they are working quite intense these days to mainly talk to the municipalities about the possibilities to get better financing for this project. The problem which I see, and maybe Jiri can say something about it, is that it's tailor-made for municipalities and public institutions. It's very hard to process for any individual investor. So let me just say roughly, there might be like subsidies for a certain proportion of construction costs, and you can gain financing up to 60% of the total budget for, I don't know, 2% per year, something like that. But for PPP projects, as we heard that are quite common in Spain, I also heard from Milica that she was mentioning that as an option. But honestly speaking, in Czech Republic, and Peter may comment on that as well, in Czech Republic, this has never been working smoothly. It's been always a pain in the ass, I'm sorry to say that. So if Jiri wants to comment on that as well, Sunil.
I completely agree. This program is basically the first attempt, I guess, in the field of affordable housing in Czech Republic. And maybe the biggest problem of the program, in my opinion, is that the tenants cannot own any other property when
Exactly, yeah.
during renting this. So if a small village or town want to build some these apartments for example, dentists or doctors, so these dentists or doctors cannot own any properties. Like I'm not sure if it's
So it's more it's not suitable for the real situations. Like everybody, like mainly given the deregulation in 90s, almost everyone owns any apartment from the previous time, and so but from investment point of view, this is not an encouragement for investors, to start building more affordable housing. Because given the overall situation, even though it seems like the only solution is rental housing at the moment, for private investors, in most of the cases, is absolutely not, let's say, feasible to enter into these projects, because financially we will see yields are somewhere around 3 to 4% maximum. So,
guys, if may I, because I have under control the question and answers, and I've asked for the one last question for the old sharks in this way. Guys, your opinion from your experience from your countries, do you think that the government or the city is capable to make more efficiently way the affordable housing to happen than the public sector? My question is straightforward, just yes, no, maybe one sentence why. Do you think that this city or state is capable to be effective enough to make a change, or it's highly dependent on the public sector developers. Maybe start with Fernando.
From my point of view, I think the administration has a lot to do, but basically the administration has to forget to cash money. Basically like this. So there is room for improvement, but you can be on board, administration. Make everything easier and put all the bank land on hands of the private investors.
Okay, thank you. Vlad?
Yeah, let me go. Difficult question. Difficult question to answer with a yes or no. You can't do it without the state. So, we have to have the state. Can the state be efficient? Coming from a former communist country, we all have a certain reservations with the state, and we all think that a state can't do it. So, if I had to say something, I think it's gonna the end solution to find some kind of better solution is gonna have to come in from the private sector in the end.
And Jana?
Well, you use the word whether affordable housing can be rescued by the state development or state organized development. We also have this movement here, like it's like a Prague development company that actually approves permits and build houses on the city lands, but they don't get any faster. And they don't have any chance to change the permitting process to speed it up. So with all this regulation and law in place, I think it's really hard. And also state proved in previous years it's been very bad landlord. That's why we privatize the apartments, and then we deregulate the rents in certain areas. So I don't really believe so. I just think that some kind of setup, like we've heard from Fernando, could be a way how to do that. Or we can move to Scandinavian countries where we actually completely see a different setup, which comes from people's DNA, I guess. There's a city of Helsinki, majority owner of the land. They set the rules under which the housing is built, and they provide land to private investors for certain, but it's all regulated in the sense that they know what they will pay for it and they know what they get for it. So, and that speeds up the process to 90 days of permitting process, fully digitalized. And the situation in Helsinki is a completely opposite of what we are hearing here about the countries. They have stock of flats and they have no, demand for this because they built too much. So somewhere in between may lay the solution, but who knows what it is.
So guys, that was a last question. Thank you very much for all the speakers, for the preparation of the presentations, for the support from the CRE US, for the technical support, and also spreading the information that we are here. I hope you enjoyed the roundtable of old and young sharks. We believe in the young because we want to go for the retirement. And now we know that we need to let them live somewhere that they are ready to pay taxes for us. So thank you very much for being with us, guys. And hopefully we will see each other in the next rounds. And for the young sharks, big thank you for being with us. I really mean it.
And thank you everyone for for making your presentations. Thank you, Peter, for giving us some opening speech on the problematics, and I hope to see you soon in some other roundtable.
Thank you.
Well, thank you and goodbye.
You very much.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.